So what's up, Carl? How are you? Thanks, man, for coming on.
Yeah, no problems at all, mate. Happy to be invited on.
Yeah, so like I've had quite a few people on with, I suppose, different areas around martial arts and that, and like with psychology. I've had some people on with strength and conditioning, but I haven't had anybody on really with nutrition. And I kind of came across some of your like some of the stuff you do on like line, or like some of the research and stuff that you've done and that and been involved with. So I said it'd be good to get you on and share some of your knowledge. I suppose for people listening, maybe if you want to give a brief overview of like who you are, what you do, who you do it with.
Yeah, sure. So my name's Dr. Carl Langan-Evans. I'm a postdoctoral research fellow in Liverpool, John Moores University, which is based in Liverpool. And I'm currently working as part of Science in Sports, so the nutrition company Science in Sport, their performance solutions division. So I'm part of science and innovation, basically doing a load of studies in and around the use of supplements, sports foods, and ergogenic aids for performance. My background's actually in combat sports, so I was involved in Taekwondo, WT Taekwondo, for 25 years.
Long time.
So I was a competitor who did marginally well, more so as a junior. So I represented Great Britain at the Junior Olympic Games in 2002, where I won gold. And as a senior, I was aiming to go to the Beijing Olympic Games. I actually competed and represented the Republic of Ireland from 2004 till 2006. I had a little bit of a swap over. Obviously, I've got Irish heritage with the Langan side of my name. My family are from Castlebar in County Mayo. So I represented Ireland in 2 European Championships. And I ended up retiring quite early. It was starting to get really difficult to make weight. So I used to compete in minus 58 kilos, coming down from like 68 kilos. And obviously we didn't know a lot back then. So it was really tough. So I ended up retiring and getting into coaching. And when I was coaching, when I was competing, I was on a university scholarship, and I got S&C and nutrition support and psychology and physiotherapy. So when I started coaching, I kind of realized the need for my athletes to have that, because we had some really good guys who were representing Great Britain on like national teams and going away winning international medals and things. So we didn't have the money to hire somebody. So I actually decided to go back to university. I applied to do a Masters of Sport Physiology. So I did that, got involved in like the nutrition, metabolism side of things. Actually, by trade, I'm a strength and conditioning coach. So I did my UKSCA, so UK Strength and Conditioning Association accreditation in 2009. After finishing, when I did my master's degree, I got made head of strength and conditioning in Liverpool, John Moores University in 2013, and then progressed into head of sports performance, so strength and conditioning and nutrition and physio and things like that. And then, a part of the way through, research-wise, I just got a bit more interested in the nutrition side of things. And I also realised that they get paid a lot more money to do a lot less work. So that was a bonus as well.
It's always a help, I guess. Yeah.
You haven't got to be in the gym every day coaching and programming and stuff like that. So, after I finished my master's, I spent a year out. I actually worked, still very, very long story, worked with the Nigerian Olympic Taekwondo team for the London 2012 Games. So we qualified 2 people for London. It was very fortunate to go to train and well, not me personally train, but to experience working with some of the best WT Taekwondo teams in the world at the time. So professional Korean teams, the Korean national team, Chinese Taipei, Mexico, places like that. And then we went to the African Olympic qualifier in Cairo, qualified 2 people for the games. And then I was offered a PhD in 2012, just prior to getting the head of S&C job with Professor James Morton and Graham Close, who are both really high-level guys in sports nutrition and research. So one of them is head of nutrition for the England rugby team, and the other one was head of nutrition for Team Sky when they won the 5 Tour de France. So I was kind of mentored by them guys. And I did, my PhD was basically in making weight in combat sports. So I did 5 studies trying to figure out how we can make weight better. And now I, like I say, I work as a research fellow. I work with Performance Solutions, and I also work as a private consultant, predominantly these days with mixed martial arts and professional boxers. So guys in the UFC, Cage Warriors, Bellator, and then a couple of guys who are preparing for world title fights. So yeah, that's the long short version of me, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen it. Like, are you working with UFC fighters, that many UFC fighters that have fights coming up?
Yeah,
Have fights coming up?
yeah. I mean, I don't think they'll have any issues. So I work currently with a Liverpool fighter called Molly McCann, who's in the
Oh yeah,
UFC.
yeah,
So yeah, she was just out in Vegas. We're coming off the back of a loss, so she's having a bit of time out, and we're going to regroup and hopefully get her back to where she needs to be. But she's doing quite well at the moment in the flyweight division. I used to work with a fighter as well called Chris Fishgold from Liverpool as well. I've worked with various fighters over the years in like different promotions. And at the moment, boxing wise, I'm working with a fighter who's prepared for a world title fight called Jazza Dickens, who's fighting Kid Galahad for the IBF world title. And I also work with another guy currently called Dennis McCann, who's a fighter down in London. He's a bantamweight, so he's preparing for a fight at the end of March. So dependent on camps, different guys at different times, but those are just some guys who people might know.
yeah. I've personally I've heard of all of them. I've seen them fight a couple of times. Yeah, Dennis McCann's quite young. Am I right in saying that? Like,
yeah, he's a young guy,
yeah,
bantamweight. He's an absolute monster for the weight as well. So we have to do. This is the first camp I work with him, but we've got to do some clever stuff to get him on weight, I suppose, happy and healthy. But yeah, no, he's a really, really, really good guy. I'm glad to be working with him. So yeah, at times, to be honest with you, mate, it's different people at different times, and you know, sometimes you work with people and then you may not, and then you work with them again. It's yeah, and some people like Jazza Dickens, I've been working with him now, and Molly for like 2-3 years, so they keep you on all the time. So yeah, it's an interesting one. And then I obviously do consultancy for some Olympic teams, and I've done research with like the Olympic Taekwondo team over here in GB and stuff like that. So I'm, you know, aware of all those guys and the coaches and the athletes and stuff. So yeah, it's a pretty cool job.
yeah.
Very cool.
So I suppose maybe someone touch on some of the nutrition kind of stuff. I suppose one thing, and I think especially when it comes to weight cutting, is like obviously you have to reduce calories, and the kind of a lot of things I think recently is where people want to reduce carbohydrates.
Yeah.
And it's the thing that carbohydrates are the devil, I suppose, when it comes to losing weight and trying to make weight.
Yeah.
But
yeah. So I suppose I'll give you a bit of a whistle stop tour of what you really need to do to get somebody to make weight. So as we know, I mean, predominantly, am I right in your podcast is aimed at Taekwondo guys, is it?
majority Taekwondo, but I've had people from MMA on. I've had people
Yeah.
So it's mostly combat sports, but Taekwondo is probably the majority of people that listen. Yeah.
So a lot of different combat sports, as we know, have a lot of different rules. You know, some combat sports, the weigh-ins a couple of hours before. Others, like professional MMA, it's like the day before. So you might have 2 hours recovery. You might have 30 hours recovery. Some combat sports, it's just weigh-in and you know, you're good to go. Others, you know, so like professional boxing, they have like in some promotions, they have a re-weigh rule in, and then in WT Taekwondo and Judo, they have a 5% re-weigh-in rule the following day, are randomized. So dependent on who you're working with, that kind of sets what you're able and capable of doing. So if you're working with a BJJ athlete, for example, they have like a 2-hour window of recovery prior to, you know, actually competing. Certain things that I might do with a professional MMA fighter, you can't do with them because there's not enough time to recover. The human body metabolically is not like a light switch. It doesn't turn off and on. It takes time, you know, to do things, you know, particularly when you ingest foods, you know, or you ingest energy and macronutrients, micronutrients, it takes time to metabolize, to digest and metabolize and utilize. So if you were working with a guy who's maybe got a 2-hour window, you would probably want to get them down to their weight through more chronic means, you know, so dietary manipulating the acute stuff. So like real, dehydration or, manipulation of certain things that you would maybe do in an MMA fighter who's got 30 hours, you wouldn't necessarily do. Whereas, like say, with an MMA fighter, you would also chronically want to try and get them to the lowest weight that you could, but you've got a lot more room to play around with a lot more things. But typically what you want to do, and this is, you've probably heard me talk on other podcasts, and this is what drives me crazy, is you can't, that contextually gives you a strategy, but you can't put a strategy in place without knowing a lot of information. You can, but you're guessing, like anybody who does. So my advice to all the people who are listening is, if you're working with someone and they're not doing a fair amount of assessment, they're really guessing, and their guess is probably about as good as yours, to be honest, without paying somebody to guesswork. So the first thing that we do, that you really have to do, is you have to figure out what their body composition is. So it's like, the main reason why that's important is because somebody comes to me and they say, I want to make a specific weight. I need to establish body composition to know how they're, well, one, if it's capable for them to make the weight, and two, how they're then going to make the weight. So have they got reserves of fat mass that we can lose through diet and dietary manipulation and exercise, so calories in, calories out, to get them leaner? If they have, great. That's not a difficult thing to do. Do we actually need to maybe take away a little bit of their lean mass, their muscle tissue, to get them to a specific weight? Sometimes with like MMA fighters and boxers, you have to try and do that just to be able to get them there. Do they have a really nice window to be able to do a lot of acute stuff? So, if like a guy comes here and says, and I've had this in the past, a guy comes here and goes, I want to lose 10 kilos, I want to get from 68 to 58. You measure them body composition, they're like, 7% body fat, they've got nothing to lose. You do some calculations, and they're literally going to have to lose like 12% of the body mass in like lean tissue, and that's not healthy. Like, it's dangerous. It's possible. Everyone says, well, can you do it? And you're like, yeah, I can do it. But one, it's probably going to like damage them, like health wise.
Yeah.
Two, they're going to be in absolutely no fit state to compete at the best. And three, in some of the research that we've done, which we'll probably dig into a little bit later, you can either, physically harm them or kill them as well, because a lot of what we do, there's not a massive research base for this, and another thing, red flag for anyone who's listening, is anyone who calls himself a specialist or an expert, be wary. I've been doing this for over a decade now. I did a PhD in it. Believe you me, I am not an expert. I've got a lot to learn about this. I think a lot of us have. So anyway, first thing you really want to do is you want to establish that body composition. Is it feasible? If it is feasible, from the back of that, what you need to establish is something called resting metabolic rate. So that's basically the amount of calories that somebody needs as an absolute minimum to operate on a daily basis. If you lay in bed all day, you did nothing at all, you would need that amount of calories for your function, your overall body function to work as normal. The reason why that's important is, A, if you start going below that, you can cause a lot of problems, number one. And B, basically you need that as a minimum in order to then, safely and effectively make weight. So that's the second thing that they need to do. Those are the two key things that you really, really need to do to help somebody establish and make weight. If there's other kind of sexy stuff you can put on top of that. So, you may do like a substrate utilization assessment where you look at where people maximally burn fat in, mapped against like running speed or heart rate or intensity zones. You may do fitness profile, you may do lactate threshold. There's a lot of that stuff, but those two for me are absolute key, because they help you establish, can they make the weight? How can they make the weight? And then the second one, the RMR, helps you establish what you need to do as a minimum from a dietary point of view in order for them to make weight safely and effectively. So yeah, I've rambled on for a little bit there, mate. I'm sorry, but hopefully that gives you a bit of a backdrop of what you kind of do.
No, that's all good. And then, so what are the type of ranges you would like to see that like somebody in? Because obviously, from my own understanding, is you kind of don't want to be cutting, I suppose, more than kind of 10% of body mass or body weight, lean body mass. Like you kind of want to be in 6 to 8% kind of range would be better.
Yeah. First thing I want to do is probably classify terminology. So the term weight cutting to me and to people within the area, constitutes something called active or rapid weight loss. So when you cutting is basically the short-term acute, maybe couple of days, couple of hours leading into the event. That's cutting. So that's cutting. Prior to that, you've got chronic weight loss, which is weight management basically. So that's modulation of, trying to maintain muscle and lose fat mass. The two strategies are completely different. Obviously the way you approach one to the way you approach the other. In terms of percentages, now I have taken overall between chronic and active weight loss, so weight management, weight cutting, I've taken as much as 20% off somebody before, utilizing both of them, but they actually had it to lose. They had fat tissue. They had probably half of that was lost through chronic weight management, and the other half was lost in the cutting phase or the acute phase. When we talk about percentages in the acute phase, the honest answer to what you've asked is we don't know. And it's very, 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 very individualized. There is guidance out there to suggest that, what we do know for sure is if you cut over 2% of your body mass, particularly in dehydration, it starts to affect cognitive function. If you cut over 5%, it starts to affect physical function. So things like strength, power, sport specifics. And if you cut over 10%, that's when you start damaging things like organs, your kidneys, your liver, you might start damaging your brain. Any much further over that, that's when you start going into the dangerous territory of death. So general guidance is we would never, ever try and acutely cut more than 10%. But for me, in an ideal world, the number that you're really looking at is below 5%, because as long as you've got time to recover, even 2 hours is enough. In certain instances, 2 hours minimum is probably enough to recover 5% of dehydration, of acute.
Yeah.
But yeah, actual numbers, nobody really knows. And I can tell you from personal experience, I have guys who cut, up to 10%, professional MMA guys, the way we do it, and then the refueling and rehydration strategy we put in place, they're absolutely fine. I've also worked with other guys, if you do more than 2%, they feel like rubbish, to be honest. They don't feel well at all. So very, very, very individual process. The other thing as well is the difference between men and women. Men are generally able to cut more than women, purely from a perspective of they have more muscle mass and less fat mass generally. So they contain more water, so they're able to, so men generally have about 60% of total body water fluid, whereas women, and this is a generalization based on, say, a typical man, typical woman, women tend to have around about 56%. So those numbers may change, may be lower for a woman. But again, mate, being completely honest, and you'll probably hear me say this a lot, we really don't know. We don't know what, it's not like we've got this is what you should do and this is what you should do, and we know this is safe. It's guidelines more than absolute rules, is what I'd say. And then in the acute, in the chronic phase, basically you can lose as much as, again, you could lose 25% of your mass if you've got a lot of fat mass on there, basically. So it all depends. But yeah, that acute phase is probably the real dangerous bit, to be fair.
Yeah. So then, like, once you've decided on a weight class, you've decided that this person can make the weight, and you're starting with the chronic weight loss phase, how do you balance, I suppose maybe this is the challenges, how you balance obviously going into a calorie deficit to reduce the body fat and also trying to fuel training sessions?
This is what I've spent the last 10 years, to be honest, mate, trying to figure out. We think at John Moore's, we got a pretty nice formula. And like I say, we've done some research. I've published I published a paper 10 years ago on this called Making Weight in Combat Sports. And then we recently published a case study where we employed the strategies that we put in place and showed, like positive performance benefits. So yeah, you establish body composition, as we said, you establish rest and metabolic rate. And let's say that the individual's rest and metabolic rate is 1,700 kilocalories. Generally for a 60, 70 kilo guy, it'd be in and around 1,800 kilocalories. What you then do is you would design a diet based on that amount. You would set it at that, because then if we meet that, we know that we're meeting the minimum required amount of calories that they need for key physiological function. Go below that, things can start going wrong. if it was a case of they were doing, say, if you put them on 1700, but they were burning 5,000 calories and there's a huge deficit, then yeah, that's going to cause problems as well. So it is a balance. So generally we put people on RMR because what I would say is, believe it or believe it not, because we've done a bit of work in this, combat sport guys don't expend probably as much as monitors say they do or what they think they do either. For instance, you know, a Tour de France cyclist might expend anywhere between 6,000 to 10,000 calories in a training day, based on the volume of work that they do. The highest I've ever seen, and this is in like real high pro level MMA guys, is maybe 2,000 calories energy expenditure, you know, in a day. That's on top of rest and metabolic rate. So like overall expenditure would be like, you know, 3,000-4,000. So that's why I'm always happy to go at rest and metabolic rate with combat guys, because they don't get me wrong, training is very hard and it's very tough, but if you remember, it's very intermittent. It's stop, start, stop, start, stop, start. You might do a 2-hour session, but if you actually look at the amount of work that's done in a 2-hour session, it might only equate to, say, half, if that makes sense. So the energy expenditure is not that high. So we're always happy to go on that. So we know our calories are set at 1,800 as an example for this individual. What we then do is we want to give them enough protein throughout the day that will protect and maintain their lean mass. Unless we've identified that they need to lose lean mass, we want to maintain it. And typically what we do is we do it on a relative amount per kilogram of body mass. So the number for protein is 1.5 to 2 grams of body mass. So if it was a 60 kilo guy, for example, or a 70 kilo guy, between 120 and 140 grams for the whole day. And what we would do with that is we want to kind of separate and dose that out throughout the day. So in an ideal world, we want like 20 to 40 gram, you know, feed. So it might be 30, 40 grams in meals, and it might be additional 20 grams throughout the day. And just by constantly dosing that protein, we help protect lean mass alongside the training. And if you do any resistance training, you won't lose any lean mass, which is really good. Fats is something that you certainly don't want to eradicate from the diet. Again, it used to be, and I know we'll talk about carbs in a second, but a lot of people go really, really low fat, but fat is actually very important for a lot of things. It helps you transport fat soluble vitamins throughout the body. It's a really, really good source of anti-inflammatory properties. A lot of your physiological systems, like people don't realize that your central nervous system is actually innervated by fat. So it's basically got a sheath of fat around it. So this is where, like, when we're deciding how low somebody can go, we would never in a male go below 6% body fat, because research has shown if you do that, bearing in mind the brain is predominantly made of fat, you need fat around certain organs and tissues for function. If you go too low, that's really bad. In females, it's higher. It's about 12%. So this is why I was saying earlier on, if we have a guy and they're trying to make weight and they're like 7%, well, you know, what have you got to lose? You know, you've only got a bit to lose acutely, you know, so you've got to be really smart with that. So yeah, that'd be a minimum. But in terms of dietary fat intake, we tend to set that about 1 gram per kilo. So 60 grams of fat, because 1 gram of fat in relation to 1 gram of protein and carbs is calorically higher. So 1 gram of carb and protein equals 4 kilocalories per gram, whereas 1 gram of fat equals 9. So we don't want a lot of fat because it's very, very calorie dense, but we need some fat. And then the big one that you talked about before, carbohydrates. Basically, once you program protein and once you program fat, everything else in that calorie allowance should be carbs. And that generally you want at least around 3 grams per kilo of carbohydrates. You know, so again, if it was a 70 kilo guy, it'd be like 200 plus grams of carbohydrates for the day. Now, carbs are massively important. Like, I cannot stress the way the body works is like a computer system, and the CPU, the central processing unit, the brain, needs to constantly run all the time. And the body is really smart and really clever. When the CPU is not getting enough energy, it's not getting enough fuel, it starts to put things into power down mode, you know, like sleep mode, basically. And it tends to do that quite well when it's not getting enough energy, and particularly when it's not getting enough carbs. The the real key fuel in the body, particularly for the brain, is glucose. It needs a constant supply of glucose. And no matter what you eat, whether it be carbohydrates, fats, or proteins, there are processes within the body that will turn that fuel into glucose. It just so happens that carbohydrate in the forms of glycogen, when it's metabolized, is very easily converted into glucose. Fat takes a bit of time to be converted into glucose. Protein takes an even inordinately longer amount of time to convert to glucose. So what I would say to you on that basis is ketogenic diets, which is very popular in combat sports at the minute, and particularly low carb, high fat diets, are not the best idea in a sport where you need a lot of fuel rapidly and quickly for intermittent high intensity bouts of work, one, and two, in a sport where you need to cognitively be thinking, very quickly, and tactically and things like that. So I'm not on the low carb bandwagon. I definitely think there's a place for it generally. I think in maybe in general public or in certain sports there may be something in and around that, but for high intensity combat sports, trust me, if no one takes anything away from this that I've said, don't go on ketogenic, low carb, high fat diets. It's just a really bad idea. You need carbohydrates in and around training to really specifically fuel the high intensity work that you're going to do. If you're doing low intensity work, you might not need as much carbohydrate. So going back to your question, protein, as we say, you'll dose throughout the day. Fat, you'll dose throughout the day. You predominantly get your fat in your meals. Carbs, you can actually periodize around training sessions. So when I'm working with like professional guys who might do 3 sessions a day, let's say they do a steady state run in the morning, they do sport specific training in the afternoon, and then they do S&C in the evening. We would very much in the morning probably do that training fasted, or if they have anything, it'll just be with like protein. The real key reason is if we're in a low carbohydrate state, we're predominantly utilizing fat as a fuel source during that exercise, and if we're trying to lose fat, that's a good strategy. Then when they finish that, they'll have a nice decent meal with a good amount of protein and fat, and probably a good amount of carbs to help fuel the afternoon session where they've got to really work. After that, they might have a moderate carb. They might have a bit of high carb again prior to S&C, and in the evening prior to going to bed, they might go low carb again. So you can do it like that. Or, dependent on the individual athlete, you can also have it set throughout the entire day. Some people like it more and less around training. Other people just like it normal. But again, final point, and I know I've rambled on again, but hopefully it's good information. The meals that you have can be either smaller or larger. So I work with some fighters and they're like, I want 3 big meals a day. So out of the 1,800 calories, we'll split that into breakfast, lunch, dinner, big meals, and we'll do it like that. I have other fighters who like, I want to eat I want to eat often, I want to feel like I'm eating all the time. So we might split it into 5 or 6 feeds across the day. Both of them result in the same thing, because this is probably gonna sound like a real cop out now, mate, to be honest. Every single diet on planet Earth, ketogenic, low carb, high fat, Atkins, paleo, whatever, it's calorie, it's energy balance. What they all basically do in one different way or another is basically more is going out than is going in. It's just energy balance. So ultimately, no matter how you do it, you will make weight. But in having the right amount of those calories, meat and RMR, enough protein, enough fat, and then carbs, you will lose weight, feel good, feel full, have good appetite, and be able to train efficiently. So yeah, that's kind of the way we tackle it in our world.
Yeah, that's what, like I said, every diet, if you're going to go on a diet that cuts out a food group, then of course you're going to go into a deficit and you're going to lose weight. But like that, again, it's not necessarily the way. And I was only having a conversation with a guy the other day, saying like, I've had people from the Taekwondo Irish team come to me kind of the last week, or I've a little bit of weight to lose the last week, and I'm going, okay, well, we'll do a few bits, maybe with some water or whatever, some salt, fiber, and you're kind of saying we'll cut out carbs on this day to reduce, like that, reduce glycogen and that. And they're kind of saying, I haven't had carbs in 2 months. And I'm kind of going, you've kind of, like,
Yeah.
What are you doing? Like,
oh, well, like I say, everything
so,
everything we talked about there is in the chronic phase. So that would be for us to lose fat mass, maintain muscle, and get the weight down. The acute phase, you've already mentioned a few things there. The acute phase is a real interesting one because there's a lot of strategies out there. A very good friend of mine, Dr. Reid Reel, who's head of nutrition at the UFC Performance Institute in Shanghai, he's done some amazing research in this work. And in fact, we're just about to publish a paper together on weight making in female athletes, which discusses some of this. The strategies that we have available to us, believe it or believe it not, don't have a large research base of evidence in and around combat sports. So we can do things exactly like you've mentioned. Reducing muscle glycogen is one strategy. The reason why we do that in the acute phase and we might cut carbs down in that phase is, one, every gram of glycogen is bound to 3 mils of water. So if you lose a gram of glycogen, you lose water. So basically, probably the resultant loss of glycogen doesn't result in weight loss. It's the loss of glycogen that you lose body water. That's where the weight loss comes from. But honest answer, to be fair with you, mate, no one's ever studied that. It's an assumption, not a not an established thing. You know, it's just kind of like, you know, physiologically 1 gram of glycogen, 3 mils of water, you know, and it's an assumption. We're having discussions now where we're actually saying, is that a good idea? Because when you reduce, there's been some studies showing that when you limit the amount of carbohydrate that you have, even for a matter of days. So let's think of a fight week now, and, you know, you go low carb to reduce glycogen. Your capacity to utilize glycogen when you reload it becomes diminished. You know, so me and Professor James Morton have had conversations, and we were kind of like, well, maybe the strategy isn't to reduce carbs. Maybe it's to enhance carbs. So have more more carbs. Because the other thing that we would do is you would try and reduce glycogen, but you would also do that in line with low fiber and low residue foods. So basically foods that are going to pass through the gut. And the reason why we would do that is because a lot of food that's fibrous gets held in the gut, and that can be a lot of weight. And again, you have interstitial fluid within the gut that when there's fecal matter in there, it's bound to it. So if we take low fiber, low residue foods and it clears your gut, we assume again that it will help you lose weight. All the evidence from that at the moment comes from medical colonoscopy papers, none in combat sports. No one's actually ever definitively showed in a sporting population, oh, you go on a low residue, low fiber diet, you lose weight. I can probably tell you anecdotally, and you can probably say anecdotally, well, I've done it and you've lost weight, but you know, there's no proof to that regard. So it's just something that we do, but it is something that I think we should do, and it would work, and it would reduce it. But again, the reducing glycogen one, we're trying to get our head around that a little bit. So more on that. And then the next stage, if you've reduced glycogen to release bound water, if you've reduced gut content to release bound water, interstitial fluid, that helps you lose a little bit of mass. The next thing you want to then do is play on your sodium electrolyte balance. The typical one that all combat sports do, and that everybody's probably experienced at some point in their life, which I still have PTSD about, is dehydration. And you'll do that through a lot of different means. Some people will limit fluids. Most people do. Some people will go into heated environments. Some people will exercise in sauna suits and things like that. Again, the research in that at the minute, very loose. Believe it or believe it not, the best researching group at the moment who's doing some of the best work in this is actually in Ireland. Forgive me for this, I think it's UCD. I think it is. There's a few colleges in Dublin. I get them mixed up.
There's DCU and UCD, so it's
I don't know. It's one of them two. So it's a guy called John. He's good. He's a mate of mine called John Connor. So John, if you're listening, forgive me, mate. Whichever one you work at, you guys are doing doing good work. So they're doing research at the minute, looking at hot baths.
I think that's DCU.
DCU,
because a guy, I think, because one of the guys I've had him on the podcast, and he's been on the Taekwondo, he was involved. There was a paper recently published, I think, about like salt in the bath and does that, and the temperature.
And so those guys are doing brilliant work on temperature of the baths. They're doing brilliant work on salt. You know, so the first paper that they did basically showed when you add salt in, it doesn't do bugger all, basically. So save your money and don't buy Epsom salts, just get into the bloody water, you know. So And then there's been some research recently coming out showing, so I sent this to Geordie Sullivan, who's at the Fight Dietitian. Again, this wasn't in combat sports per se, but showing the differences between saunas and hot baths on cerebral function, so like brain function and things. And again, it's far better when you're trying to dehydrate to use a method where your head is not in the heat. Saunas don't allow you to do that. Hot baths do. So I would always sway. Now, typically, culturally, when I used to compete, sauna was my go-to. I'm sure you've done it and other guys have done it. Bloody awful. It just fries your brain. You know,
it's throbbing like
throbbing, heart beating through your chest. So saunas are not a great means. So what we typically do, they make you sweat, but what I would always recommend now is to do baths. But yeah, going around the houses, mate, a lot of what we do in the acute phase is, there's not a lot of evidence. John at DCU is doing some good stuff. Some of it comes from just general research. But yeah, you know, things like low residue diets, not a lot of research in sport and populations. Reduced muscle glycogen, not a lot of research in sport and populations. We've got a lot of work to do that. So this is the part where we have to be really careful in what we use, because we don't know. And as going around the houses, going back to what you said before, you know, what's the recommendation? 5%, 8%, 10%. We don't know. We really do not know. I don't think there's a general number you can put on it because it's so individual. But those are some of the strategies that you would do. Reduce muscle glycogen, but that one's a bit out there at the moment. Limit fiber intake, so reduce low residue, low fiber diet, low sodium with that as well, to try and manipulate fluid electrolyte balance. And then the only other one really to talk about in that is dehydration, so limiting fluids and heated environments. I tend to prefer passive, so things like baths versus sauna suits, you know, and exercising, because you should be tapering in that phase. You should be relaxing. You know, it should be about making weight, not about exercising and using energy. You want to try and save the energy for the competition. So passive means, and then the only other one, which I'm sure a lot of people would have heard about, is water loading, which again, Dr. Reid Reel, like I said, my friend did a fantastic paper on from the Australian Institute of Sport, basically showing that if you use 100 mils per kilo, so for instance, if you're a 70 kilo guy, drink 7 liters per so many days and then reduce the fluid, what you basically do is you've got to find balance between electrolyte and fluids. And when you knock that out of kilter and then try and balance it, you lose fluid. But one study, and I think the loss was like 1-2% body mass. So it wasn't, you know, and there's a lot of stuff around that where, you know, is it potentially harming your kidneys, and could it cause something called hyponatremia, which is like too much fluids. And so, yeah, I know this is a very, you know, scientist answer, to be honest with you, Jamie, but we don't know with a lot of that stuff. It's just anecdotes, and we've got a lot of research to do on combat sports. Like say, John and the guys at DCU are probably leading the forefront at the minute in the hot baths, and Reid did some stuff in the acute world, but we've got a lot to go. One thing I can tell you all though is we're doing a low residue study in John Moores at the moment. We're just about to start it within COVID. It's one of the studies that we're trying to do in the COVID environment. But yeah, we're basically going to look at do low residue diets. First of all, do they even cause weight loss? So we're just going to get a load of guys to do 5 days of a normal diet, little washout period, 5 days of a low fiber, low residue diet, and see if it causes weight loss. If it does, then mechanistically we'll start looking in like the gut and things like that. But yeah, so again, another long-winded answer, as you can probably see from me, mate. But yeah, a lot of things we can do, but it's on a very individual basis, and there's not a lot of evidence base. And like I say, not attacking anybody specifically, but anybody who kind of calls themselves a specialist in and around that area, or an expert in and around that area. I know the real experts in this area across the globe, and not one of them regards themselves as an expert. So anybody who calls himself that, that's a red flag moment, to be fair. Yeah, be careful, be wary.
Yeah. I suppose, like you said, it's like there's, when people run these kind of protocols, like something happens, they lose weight. So there must be, you know, something that happens. But I suppose like the challenge is, well, when you run all of these, when you do like 3 or 4 different things at the same time as well, what actually worked, and then to trying to isolate and does that repeat itself over and over to see, does it definitely work?
there's something in every strategy we've talked about. And again, when you think of the physiology, reducing muscle glycogen, there's probably something in it because it is bound by water. So, but it's just never been examined, for efficacy. But I can tell you anecdotally, it works. But because we do a lot of these things in combination now, I say
Yeah.
it works. One thing I've never done is gone, we're just going to reduce glycogen. Does it work? We're just going to reduce fiber. Does it work? The combination of all of them gets you to make, it might just be general dehydration that makes you lose the weight. You know what I mean? So yeah, what I'm saying is there's something in this, but in isolation, we don't know because it's never been done. But no, all those strategies work. And then, yeah, we're, really starting to think now, is reducing glycogen, if you reduce the capacity to use it in competition, is that a good idea? If we do a study and we go, reducing muscle glycogen results in 1% loss of body mass, does that really offset the fact that, okay, then we'll put you on a low residue, low fiber, high carbohydrate diet that will have you full of energy for the competition, so
Yeah.
we probably need to look into that. And then, one thing I can tell you in terms of the amount of weight you can hold within your gut. I had an athlete once who was getting ready to compete at a major tournament. He had to be 68 kilos. We had him on dietary manipulation. This was years ago now when I was quite an early practitioner and there wasn't a lot of guidance. 72.5 kilos, 72.5 for weeks. Nothing was happening and we were manipulating his diet and nothing was changing. And just by coincidence, I said to him, when was the last time you went to the toilet? And he was like, probably about 2 weeks ago. I'm really struggling to go to the toilet. So he went to the doctor and he got given some laxatives, some natural senna. He took that and the following day he weighed 68.9 kilos from 72.5. So that's literally how much crap, pardon my language, you can
All good.
So there's something there is something in it. I can tell you there's something in it, but yeah, we just need to look into this stuff. But in the past, there's never really been an interest, whereas now I think there's a lot more interest in this sort of stuff. And, as you know, with UFC and pro boxing and even stuff like, Taekwondo and other, combat sports, there's a lot more interest. So there's a lot more chance for us to do the research now. Because in the past, if I'd have asked, if I'd have gone and said, I want to do this study and apply for funding, because studies are not cheap, people would just be like, get lost. Whereas now, because there's interest, you've got a better chance of doing it, really.
And just with the glycogen, because when somebody goes keto, I'm right in saying it can take maybe 7, 10, 14 before the person is actually keto. So if it takes that long to deplete glycogen, then how long does it actually take to replenish? Because if it takes to totally deplete it and go keto takes so long and you're only getting 24 hours to try and replenish glycogen, can you do it in 24 hours?
You can reduce glycogen in a matter of hours through exercise. So if you do bouts of real high intensity work, carbohydrate, with no carbohydrate, you can reduce glycogen to seriously low levels in a matter of hours. So this is some of what we do in like the laboratory when we're looking at low carbohydrate trials. Dietary manipulation of carbohydrate to reduce glycogen. Honestly, if I said up front to you now, I don't know. There's probably literature in and around that, but I've never read it. But it would probably take days because utilizing the reason why it happens in a matter of hours during exercise is the contraction of the muscle, the metabolism is using the glycogen within the muscle. But when you're not using the glycogen, so at rest, just moving around, it probably takes a long time. So the replenishment of glycogen depends on how low you are and how you've lost it. And then, to be honest with you, it can take 24 hours, days. This is where, like, reducing glycogen, for example, in a BJJ athlete, or reducing glycogen in a day of weigh-in prior to competing, probably not a good idea because there's not enough time for you to ingest food, to metabolize it, to store it as energy. It's not a good strategy. So short-term weigh-ins, glycogen manipulation is not a good strategy. And say, this is what I'm saying, ketogenic, if you can imagine doing a ketogenic diet all that time and then trying to replenish your not a smart idea. Whereas if it was with a UFC fighter, so when I'm working with Molly, we might do that strategy because we've basically got 30 hours after the weigh-in to fuel, refeed, for the glycogen to be sort of for the carbohydrates to be digested, metabolized, stored. So it's the strategy is context dependent. If you've got a short window between weigh-in and competition versus a longer window between weigh-in and competition versus because one thing I say as well is you could use glycogen manipulation in a short-term weigh-in to fight window if you have one fight that might be, I don't know, like a typical 3-2 minutes.
Yeah.
Because you don't need the glycogen. It's not that hard. You can get through it. But if it was a day of weigh-in for a Taekwondo tournament where you're going to be competing from 8 a.m. until bloody, midnight, as Taekwondo is a crazy sport, isn't it? We do all our fights on one day. You're going to need energy for that. So glycogen manipulation is probably not a good idea, because you probably need stored energy to get throughout the day. So yeah, mate, another typical long-winded answer where we've got an idea, but we don't know. Like, we need to do a lot more research.
Yeah. But look, it's like everything. Like when you get into the weeds, but like it all depends. It's like it doesn't matter what the topic is, whether it's nutrition, if it's strength and conditioning. It doesn't matter what it is. Once you get into the real details of it depends. Is a lot of the answer, I think, sometimes.
Absolutely, and science a lot of the time is catching up to practice, but practice also needs to be informed by science. And it's only really, the big money research in science, to be honest with you, mate, is in and around health. So that's where you get your big grants to study things. Sport, you don't tend to get a lot of funding, or they might, so who's going to give me, doing a glycogen manipulation study where we actually looked at that as combat sport athletes do it with biopsies and, a serious amount of, analysis. You're looking at like tens of thousands, if not £100,000 study. Who the hell cares enough for us to pay us that money to do us that study? That's the issue, to be honest with you, at the moment. But no, the exciting thing is there's a lot more to learn and come out. The negative thing is that we're probably employing a lot of stuff that may or may not work. It's just a case of, for me, as long as what's being employed is conducive to athlete health and benefits performance, then it's all good. But yet, culpability, if you're working with someone and you do any of this stuff and they become physically harmed, or, in worst case scenario, they die, there's serious issue there.
Yeah,
so
for sure. Yeah. In terms of supplements, then what sort of supplements would you recommend? In terms of, I presume, I thought it was like, I know there's a lot of study done, or I suppose like creatine is the most researched supplement out there, and that. Then would there be anything else, I suppose, like outside of that, in terms of that you would recommend? Or?
Creatine's an interesting one. It's very widely researched. The benefits of it are hugely publicized. It's definitely a performance enhancing supplement, so you want to take a 20-gram loading dose for 5 days, and then after that you would take 5 grams each subsequent day, dosed across. Creatine's a fantastic one. It improves outcomes of strength and power, which in combat sports is brilliant. The only trade-off with creatine is that it tends to come with heavy total body water retention. So a lot of people who take creatine actually put weight on because they withhold water that they wouldn't normally hold on to. So in a combat sport where you might be trying to lose weight, not necessarily a good idea, but certainly benefit. Another one is called beta-alanine. So beta-alanine, if anyone's ever taken a pre-workout, that's the one where you get itchy skin. So paresthesia, you take it and you're like, whoa, and you get that real itch. Beta-alanine is a fantastic one because it's basically called a buffering agent. So the hydrogen ions that are caused from the increases in muscle acidity, so pyruvate during high intensity exercise, so that muscle burn that you get, it helps buffer those ions basically. So it basically allows you to put in more high intensity work for longer periods of time. Again, it's an interesting one because you should take around about 6 grams per day, dosed in 4 1.5 gram doses throughout the day. It doesn't taste very nice. So you want to probably blend it or mix it with something. I used to have a former athlete who used to just take it neat, and I was like, oh my God, it's absolutely disgusting. But that's definitely one that works. And there was a really nice study showing that enhanced performance in boxing. So I would definitely encourage combat sports athletes to go on that one. Caffeine is an absolute brilliant one, but it all depends on your caffeine sensitivity. When I was competing, I was deliberately kept off caffeine, even to this day. If I have one cup of coffee, I'll be awake until next week. I'm really like caffeine sensitive. I do drink coffee, but I drink decaf because I was never allowed to have caffeine when I was younger. I'm very highly sensitive to it.
Okay.
So yeah, I used to get given caffeine capsules. So in the back end of making weight, where you're a bit tired and fatigued, take caffeine and it just gives you that buzz. And then definitely during competition, it's a great one as well. The problem with taking it in coffee is different coffee contains different amounts of caffeine, some lower, some higher. It's a bit difficult to judge. So with caffeine capsules, for example, we want to be taking around about 3 milligrams per kilogram. So times 3 milligrams. That's milligrams, not grams. If you take grams, that's heart attack, death material. So huge disclaimer for the listeners. 3 milligrams, not grams. If anyone takes grams now and tries to sue us, Jamie, we're covered.
Lovely stuff.
Yeah, caffeine's obviously a great one. Outside of those, there's good evidence for something called sodium bicarb. So basically bicarbonate of soda. Problem with it's basically an alkaline. So again, we said the acidosis that you get within the muscle. You take an alkaline, a buffering agent. The problem with it is it gives you a really bad stomach. And for individuals competing in white suits, that's never a good idea.
No, not at all.
So there's something in it. And a very good friend of mine in Edge Hill University, just up the road, Dr. Andy Sparks, is doing some great work in that at the moment. So yeah, there's promise in that, but it just the benefit. I suppose the negative far outweighs the benefit with it at the moment. And then the other one probably is nitrates, so beetroot. So people have heard a lot about beetroot. So basically there's been a good bit of evidence showing that. So basically nitrates in the form of, so organic nitrates within things like beetroot and rhubarb, when you ingest them, nitrate gets converted to something called nitrite. And that's what basically opens up your vascular system. So it allows more blood flow, more oxygen, enhanced performance. But in intermittent sports like combat sports, no real evidence. It's predominantly in endurance sports. But no, the big five for me would be whey protein, if you need it, if you're not getting enough in your diet, caffeine, creatine, beta-alanine, and maybe sodium bicarb. They're kind of your go-tos, really.
Yeah.
And then obviously another key one in combat sports post weigh-in would be your oral rehydration solutions, your energy gels and things like that will help get the, carbohydrate powders and gels and stuff are absolutely fantastic for after weigh-in because they just help you get the energy in quickly. But yeah, outside of that, the evidence basis for other stuff is still being looked into at the moment.
Cool. And just in terms of creatine, obviously you said that it does cause bloating. Would you cut that out then? We'll say coming into the acute phase. Would you reduce it?
I'll be totally honest and upfront with you. I don't use it with any of my fighters. Okay. It's something that I was having a conversation with my partner and colleague about this the other day, about us looking at like maybe a dosing strategy, that might be different, that we could utilize for combat sport guys where you don't get that weight gain and could stay on it consistently. But yeah, I don't know. The honest answer is I don't know how quickly you might lose that total body water retention when you come off it. So I don't know whether it's like, load, follow it, and then 7 days before come off it and you'll lose that. Don't know. Genuinely don't know. I could try and be a smart guy and give you an answer, mate, but I'd be lying. So genuinely don't know.
Yeah, I suppose it probably comes down to, again, it depends on the person to some degree with no research to back it up. Yeah.
Yeah, strategy. Try it. If it works, probably not something you want to try around an important competition, but, maybe go on it, come off it, see how your body weight fluctuates and stuff. But with a lot of guys, if I ever put them on something and they seen the weight go up by a kilo or two, they'd be like, get me, I'm not taking that. Get me off it. You know what I mean? So
the number on the scales kind of rules everything,
Yeah. No matter how much you try and convince somebody that the number is just an abstract concept and it's all about, the end points. To be honest, mate, it took me 10 years to stop weighing myself every day after I retired. So old habits die hard in a weight making sport for sure.
Yeah, I think everybody's the same, isn't it? It's get up,
Yeah.
go to the toilet, step on the stairs. It's the
You
morning
go,
routine, isn't it? It's the morning routine.
Get
Yeah.
up, don't think anything, go to the toilet, weigh with us, weigh with nothing on or minimal clothing, and let's see where we're at. Yeah, no, for sure.
I suppose just before we finish up, one more question. I tend to ask everybody when they come on is, if you had, I know you'd be a fan of, obviously, of fight sports. If you had to pick a favorite fighter to watch, who would you pick?
That's a great question. Across all combat sports, or can I have a few?
Go on, should we give you a few?
Okay, all right. Yeah, in boxing, I kind of like, at the moment, again, I know this is probably a biased thing. I really enjoy watching the guy I work with, Jazza Dickens. I think he's all of his fights at the minute are going the distance, but I just appreciate good boxing. He's a damn good boxer, but I mean, across the spectrum, I love all, Mayweather's fantastic, and Pacquiao, and the usual suspects. I love Tyson Fury. I actually didn't like the guy, and then when he won I was a convert. I used to think he was just some big loudmouth, and then he won the world title. And
I was the same, yeah.
the
Even around Klitschko, even into the Klitschko fight, I was hoping he'd lose to Klitschko, and then the whole story. I'm a big fan now.
I love him. I think he's brilliant. He's great to watch. So in boxing, I like watching good boxers. But yeah, I love watching Jazza. He's a great boxer. He's really entertaining. And I think probably that more comes from the fact that you've had some involvement, and you watch him do it. It's great. In MMA, that's a really good question. I wouldn't use the typical one of like, Khabib. And Khabib's great to watch. I love watching him and stuff. And I really enjoy watching McGregor. I didn't enjoy watching the last one because I thought it was going to be a better fight, to be honest. But I do enjoy watching McGregor. Just like, I think the Aldo years McGregor, I loved it. It was just poetry to watch. He was just so good. But again, I think that comes from a striking perspective. When you're a Taekwondo guy, and the way he used to kick and his movements, and I really used to enjoy watching him. And then in Taekwondo, probably in the Olympics. I haven't watched it for a while. I don't even know who the hell's still competing at the minute, but I think I used to really enjoy the energetic, crazy guys. Like there was a Turkish guy called Servet Tazagul back in the day, who's like really spinny and doubles. And I mean, again, not being from an ITF background, but more of a WT, this whole front leg checking game, mainly because I'm rubbish at it and I've got no capacity to do it. So if I did Taekwondo these days, I'd probably get beat up by a 5-year-old. But yeah, I have an appreciation for that. But I really loved the guy back in the day. So yeah, probably again, I haven't really answered the question, mate. But I just love good combat sports.
Yeah,
any kind of fight. Your stalemates, or your people who are just like avoiding, like everyone, it doesn't always have to be a war. I like tactical fights, but I like wars as well. It's as long as it's entertaining and it's just two guys two guys or girls giving their all, it's great. So, and then yeah, I haven't really mentioned many females in there, but MMA, I think Amanda Nunes and Valentina Shevchenko are absolutely tremendous. I love watching the Terry Harper fight against the
Jonas
fighter. Yeah, Tash Jonas was
great fight.
In fact, I actually think one of the best fights in combat sports ever, and I would hold my hand up, was Joanna Jędrzejczyk versus
Valentina. Shevchenko.
Not Shevchenko, the Chinese.
Sorry, Wang Zheli. Sorry, Weili Zhang.
What a fight, mate! That was probably one of the best MMA fights of all time. But I love those guys, and yeah, boxing. Obviously, Katie Taylor. I watch every one of her fights. She's fantastic. So, yeah, mate, I just love all fights, fights. But if it was to meet a fighter, it's got to be the greatest. To sit down and have a conversation with Muhammad Ali would have been, to get 30 minutes of time with him and pick his brains would be.
I was only thinking that yesterday. If I had to pick a fighter, I think it will be Ali. Yeah, just because, like you said,
how rumble in the jungle. How do you even do that? What's somebody's mindset to walk in and go and do, you know, just pick his brains and talk about, you know, how he thinks and feels. And yeah, that would be a dream come true. He truly was the greatest, without doubt.
Yeah. I only even watched back the Thriller in Manila there recently as well. And oh my God, that was just, it was
You don't get
unbelievable
fights.
war.
We're struggling to get Tyson and AJ to even fight each other, and them
I
guys
know
were
that's,
doing it on a monthly basis. So yeah, the great days are gone, unfortunately.
yeah.
They're gone.
Let's hope they can get that fight on and we get to see it and
Hopefully,
appreciate it.
yeah.
But yeah, I think we'll leave it there. Thanks, man, for coming on. I think there's lots of good bits to take away there, and
Yep.
some good things that people can take. So thanks, man, for coming on and giving your time.
Oh, no, you're welcome. It's always a pleasure. I mean, there's no point in I always say there's no point in all this information being stuck in academic papers and not being out there for people to utilize. So always happy to talk about it. And if anyone is interested, they can check me on Instagram. So my handle, I think, is at CLE SPOSCI, so SPOSCI. So check that out. I'm always popping a few bits on, or people can get in touch and stuff. So yeah, no, more than happy, mate. And thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure.
Lovely stuff. Take care. So all the best.
All the best,
Thanks,
mate. Take it easy.